Well, welcome everybody to this special edition of the Telemedia News in 10 with me, Jarvis Todd, and him, Paul Skeldon. And I was going to say before we did this introduction that we were the brains and the beards behind Telemedia Magazine News Online. But as you can see, our special guest, Sam Barker, who's a lead analyst from Juniper Research, has also got into the spirit of it. So we're all three the beards behind the industry. So well done, Sam, and thanks for joining us. Now, the reason we've got Sam on today is that a couple of weeks ago, Juniper Research put out an excellent update, I think, of a regular report that we've been following about the DCB market globally. We'll give you some more information about how you can download the white paper and how you can then dig a little bit deeper and get hold of the report from Juniper. But what we wanted to do today was quickly race through with Sam some of the kind of headline points. And I don't know if any of you saw the initial stats that went out, but the headline stat was that MNOs will benefit from DCB spend of a whopping 100 billion by 2025. And that's currently from a figure of 37 billion this year, which is a very impressive growth rate of 172%. So Paul and I thought we'd get Sam on to talk through some of the findings of that report in a little bit more detail. But I thought one of the most interesting things about this particular version of the report is, of course, that it has been written against the, going to use that word, unprecedented set of circumstances that have resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. So my first question, Sam, welcome, thank you for joining us. My first question to you was, I mean, clearly there's been a massive impact with COVID-19, and I suppose it's quite interesting that you've done this report over the course of several years now. What were the most striking findings and effects of the pandemic on the DCB market?
If you look at it from the point of view of a general financial, from a financial perspective, you're obviously seeing more and more payments moving online. There's different payment mechanisms, and obviously DCB is one of the mechanisms that's benefiting. But taking it from a global perspective, the rise is really driven by multiple different factors depending on the region. We're looking at in the Far East, where DCB is a little bit more established for things like physical goods, whereas take Europe and the US, you're looking at carrier billing for subscription services, digital subscription services. But if you need to take DCB and look at it and compare it against the existing payment mechanisms as you're moving online, there's multiple opportunities for the operators or the carriers to really push DCB as a payment mechanism for emerging services and services that are existing already. And essentially, you need to look at it from another perspective of what sorts of users are going to use carrier billing. We've got the carrier billing has been very, very successful in serving the unbanked or the underbanked in certain regions, and really that issue is the same in the UK. For example, you might have some unbanked people of a young age that they don't have a bank account yet, and that DCB offers the ability for them to pay for their own services through their phone bill. So lots of different areas. And if you look at the aspect of COVID-19 coming into play, the ability essentially to migrate your spending that you may have done in a physical retail store, and the bricks and mortar stores, as some people call them, to your DCB account is certainly an option that's well established, and building trust in DCB has been quite easy for operators, because they have the brand recognition, and DCB is certainly something that we're seeing being more and more adopted for more and more use cases. So that's what the drive in spend over DCB is being driven by.
Can I just ask, just quickly, I mean, one of the things that Paul and I have been talking about with regards to COVID was that I think we've seen some stats, haven't we, Paul, that have shown that as a direct result of COVID and people staying at home, they have been moving across to digital entertainment, which obviously falls into the DCB environment potentially. But also, I think a couple of weeks ago, Paul raised the point that the question was, is it a permanent shift? and I think there are some stats to say that if people do things long enough, it does stick. So, you know, even potentially after COVID, some of the potential gains could well be permanent as a result of people having changed their habits and in terms of the kind of things that they've been buying during the lockdown.
Yeah, is that right?
It's a very it's a very, very good point. I think obviously COVID is causing shifts in multiple different areas of you know, the economy and our day-to-day lives, you know, in multiple countries. And digital entertainment certainly is something that we believe fits really well into the DCB market. It's a relatively low cost compared to other areas, but most importantly, it's a recurring cost that you can predict very, very easily. So adding it onto a phone bill is, you know, certainly something that people are finding more and more attractive. You know, take, as you said, that, you know, you've got music streaming services and over-the-top streaming services such as, you know, Netflix and Prime Video. The recurring monthly cost or annual cost of those can essentially just be placed against a phone bill. And from a user's point of view, it's essentially just increasing the phone bill and getting a service. So the spend is essentially, from the user's point of view, unless they've obviously adopted it, you know, they've only adopted it because of the COVID pandemic and lockdown. It's essentially just migrating one spend from another payment mechanism to DCB. From the end user's point of view, there's very, very little change. And as I said before, the brand recognition of operators is something that's certainly driving that. So yeah, so you know, we're expecting to see, you know, a permanent shift if operators are able, you know, the end users are happy and operators are able to continue, you know, offering these services through carrier billing. Then we certainly see a, you know, a long-term shift towards using carrier billing for these sorts of services.
Great. We've seen quite a lot of this, as you mentioned, sort of in APAC, where, like you say, they can use it for physical goods, and they've got sort of more of a sort of history with it. Sort of driven by the sort of coronavirus, I guess, are we going to see sort of more mainstream use of carrier billing, do you think, here in the UK and in Western Europe, you know, where it's traditionally been somewhat of a sort of add-on to sort of more conventional billing mechanisms?
Yeah, it's again, it's, you know, it's taking it by a case-by-case basis, and which, as I said, the predictability of the cost and adding it to the bill is a big thing. But obviously, on the offside, the adding small costs to a bill that users are happy with is also another area. One area we have identified, believe it or not, during this COVID pandemic has been ticketing. Obviously, not very many people are traveling at the moment, but ticketing is you know, one of the sectors where we're expecting to grow a little bit more, you know, after the next couple of years. Obviously, as you said, the COVID pandemic is unprecedented. We don't really know exactly what's going to happen over the next year or two, but you know, we're predicting that you know, things will essentially start coming back to normal within the next couple of years, or at least we hope it does. And you know, ticketing is one of those areas where, for one-off payments or one-off tickets, that instead of having to go through a ticket stall, you can essentially do it by SMS or through an app and just add it to your bill for the end of the month. And you know, add that with digital entertainment, there's just ensuring that the operators can offer those services is the main way that, or the main driving force behind the growth of the total spend over direct carrier billing over the next few years.
Great. One of the other things that is often sort of thrown at me when I'm trying to advocate carrier billing is that it does face some challenges, but you know, some merchants particularly see sort of, you know, issues in some ways with it. Well, what is being done really to sort of address those sort of problems, the downside perhaps that people see of carrier billing?
Well, from a service provider's point of view, obviously there's slightly higher fees to the operators compared to other payment mechanisms. But really, from our point of view, what we've seen, what we've heard from service providers in the market is it's about offering the largest choice of payment mechanisms rather than the one that's easiest for the service provider. And obviously, DCB fits well into that. Obviously, reducing the fees to the DCB vendor or to the carrier themselves is obviously one area which can increase its attractiveness amongst service providers, although we don't necessarily see that happening in the distant future. But it really, when you look at DCB, you need to look at it as part of from a service provider's point of view, you need to look at it as part of a wider option range that they can offer to their users. And we're seeing more and more service providers leveraging DCB. There's definitely been more interest amongst it from users. As markets progresses, especially digital services, you take the music services a couple of years ago, moved to a subscription services rather than one-off payments for certain bits of content. We've seen the same things happen in the mobile and online games market, moving to subscription services now. And DCB is very attractive for these service providers to offer. And that's something that is one of another key driver of growth over the next few years.
Can I pick up on that, Sam? I mean, one of the points you make in terms of it's as Paul pointed out, is the sort of business model that's often seems to be slightly obstructive in terms of MNO flexibility on pricing. However, one of the things that comes out of your report is that companies like Facebook and Google and Microsoft are starting to, and Netflix and the big brands are starting to use DCB. So presumably, in order for them to offer DCB as an option, that is evidence, isn't it, that there's some flexibility from an operator if they feel as though the application of the billing mechanism is worthy of some kind of negotiation in terms of the pricing.
Yeah, exactly. I think these larger companies, take Facebook as an example. Obviously, the vast majority of their revenues comes from advertising, but the acquisitions they've made over the past few years have certainly shown that they're looking to launch more and more services directly to the consumer rather than gain revenues through advertising. And obviously, DCB will be something that, if they're interested in it now, is certainly something that they're going to be wanting to offer in the future. If we, Facebook again is taking an example, very much more likely to offer digital services above all else, probably on a subscription basis, as I've mentioned. And the interest that you show now would point to them looking to offer DCB as a payment method as a choice to their end users.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a quote in your report that said research warns that vendors will need to reevaluate their monetization models to compete with established payment methods such as credit card and digital wallets. So, you make that point very clearly. I think, probably if we're having this conversation in a year's time, we'd really want to see some movement on that, wouldn't we?
Yeah, it's certainly something that would certainly benefit the market, but from a DCB vendors and operators point of view, they're obviously very much focused on maximizing their revenues. One thing we do anticipate to happen is maybe there'll be some smaller movements from operators and vendors to lowering these fees in the future. It may be done on a sector by sector basis to certain areas or digital services. And once that is that so-called race to the bottom, whereby if one vendor or one operator is offering it, it almost forces the others in the market to follow suit, really. So it's something that we sort of do anticipate to happen, but not in the in the foreseeable future. What we really want to see is these vendors looking to expand the services, looking at the new emerging opportunities, because some of the growth, such as one sector that we looked at was the gambling sector. We looked at what sort of services they could offer there, and 30% on some high spending end users in that sector certainly wouldn't be very appealing. So gambling as an example could be one sector in which DCB vendors and operators look to lower that fee that they charge to the service provider.
But I mean, of course, one of the big selling points in that sort of scenario is that even if the price is high, the acquisition rates are high as well. So whilst you might be looking at a smaller margin on the transaction itself, it actually makes very good sense to use DCB as a way of onboarding new customers. And I think probably gambling is the best example of that currently that we've got. I was just wondering whether or not we should perhaps move on to, and we talk about this a lot, DCB in emerging markets, because that always comes through as being an exciting story. And I noticed that some of the predictions that you put together about the size of what is currently the unbanked market, I think going from 28% to about 18% in 2025 actually represents what, roughly about 1 billion people, a billion potential customers in the next 5 years. By anybody's stretch of the imagination, that is an absolutely huge opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also key to remember as well that you know, some of those unbanked or underbanked individuals obviously won't have access to DCB. They might not have a cellular connection or a device to use on. But it does seem to be over the last few years that financial services reach, you know, certain users after you know, feature phones or you know, mobile phones in general, and that means that from their point of view, they're using DCB before they can use other payment methods. Because of that, they're becoming more and more comfortable with using DCB and using obviously using those services for payments as well, and you know, P2P payments and things like that. But yeah, it's a very interesting market in how it's going to develop, because as they become more and more comfortable with using DCB and other services through their phone, and then they get access to you know, banking services, you know, in the future, it's certainly something that we're looking to see whether they're going to stick with DCB either entirely, or will they continue to use it for certain services, or, you know, there's quite a lot of questions out there. Obviously, we're seeing a little bit being moved for when it comes to certain services, we're seeing that some people are moving to established banking and payment mechanisms, and you know, how that will continue, and what essentially what percentage of the market will be left for DCB.
Interesting.
Yeah, good stuff. There's not much to talk about. It's a big area. Yeah, it's be interesting to see whether a lot of that, how much that sort of influences the sort of uptake of digital services and streaming and all those things we take for granted here in those emerging markets as well. So I think the two sort of are inextricably linked, which should be interesting to watch, I think, in the coming weeks and months.
But also, Paul, just one of the things that I picked up on, which I know is kind of obvious when you think about it, but in terms of seeing the sort of, it's easy to throw figures like 1 billion new consumers around. And I think Sam makes a good point that they're not all going to be customers, but there are some interesting stats about the penetration of refurbished iPhones in those specific markets, which, you know, very much means that, you know, that's going to start filtering through. So, you know, the phones that have been discarded from primary markets are going to start to be in the hands of many individuals in emerging markets. So, you know, the reality of them being able to access, you know, sort of services which are aligned to DCB billing are clearly much, you know, going to only increase exponentially. So I think that's something to, you know, worth remembering.
I think as well as this pandemic, I mean, it's, you know, it's probably not going to go away anytime soon. Here in the sort of developed world, the need for contactlessness for everything is also going to drive it. I think, as Sam brought up about ticketing, it's you know, those sorts of things we're going to see a lot more of it, because it's easy and quick. You know, and sort of, you know, for those sort of micro purchases, it's a contactless and easy way of doing it, which is sort of something I think that's going to sort of stay with us for some time to come.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and there's a section in the white paper that talks about drivers, and you know, it was basically a list of what Paul and I bang on about on a weekly basis about, you know, ideal for young people, low click payments, it's easy. You know, there's so many benefits, and you know, and it was very interesting to see that, you know, you highlighted them as being one of the most important reasons why DCB, you know, could and should and is looking to be a good news story over the next 5 years. I just wondered, Sam, you know, apart from, I mean, we get a lot of this information from the vendors who use it as part of their marketing, you know, clearly identifying the USPs. I just wondered, you know, do you have sort of end user experiences with your research, or do you tend to sort of pitch your research directly at the vendors and they tell you why it's a good idea?
Well, when we do our research, we tend to speak to the major players in the market. We tend to you know, ask what they've got their ears a lot closer to the ground than we do. They get the information, and, you know, they will share with us what sort of plans they've got. You know, obviously without not into too much detail. So we have a general idea of where the market's going. We obviously speak to a number of operators throughout the year as well, and we're looking to see what their views are on it. And certainly over the last couple of years, we've seen, we've spoken to operators 2 years ago, and they said, DCB is certainly something on our radar, and that's not particularly it. And growing their DCB business, and obviously they want to do it, but they've not particularly been sure, what strategy or what areas they need to focus on. But over the last 2 years, the number of operators we've spoken to have had more formulated plan and greater detail in what sort of areas they want to tackle. It's showing that DCB has been taken a lot more seriously, especially in developed markets like Europe and North America, where DCB is nowhere near as established as other areas. And they're less looking at what the more established use cases and can they take market share from other payments there, and they're starting to look at what areas are coming out and emerging now that they can get into, get their foot in the door early, so to speak, and making digital services and the movement to subscriptions is obviously probably the most prominent use case or most prominent driver of that. So yeah, it's certainly something that over the last couple of years has been growing, but growing very, very steadily. And maybe over the next 5 years, what we're anticipating to see is operators and DCB vendors being much more successful, as I said, getting their foot in the door for new services. And that's not just in developing regions, that's in developed regions too.
Absolutely. And so we might not be talking about video and games and gambling. We might be talking about taxis and transportation and all those other potential acronyms and verticals that we're starting to see seeping through into our sort of newsroom as well. So I would agree with you, and I think the really interesting side of it is going to be not only to see how those impressive growth figures are justified, but also how DCB can be diversified into other verticals, apart from perhaps the more obvious ones that we've all come to know and love, and that seem to be great test beds for what DCB can do. I suppose we ought to probably think about wrapping up, because we do call it News in 10, although we very rarely get to 10, very rarely get under 10 minutes. And in fact, I was just about to remind anybody that was watching that if they saw this video on LinkedIn, they would have it would be cut short, but they won't see that because it's already been cut short. So apologies for my lack of professionalism there. Sam, I mean, from my point of view, the white paper is freely available for any of our readers to download from the telemediaonline.co.uk website white paper section, and obviously I know they can go to Juniper Research website as well. But clearly there's a full report behind this white paper, and I just think perhaps it might be useful for you to give our audience a quick overview on what else and how you drill deeper in that report, how they can get hold of it, and perhaps why they should get hold of it.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Obviously, a white paper doesn't give you as much detail as the full report does. So we've looked at the global market for DCB. We split it by our 8 key regions. We have a select countries which we feel we've identified as probably being fastest to grow, probably have the most opportunities. We then looked at we've sized the market, looking at the total spend, the total operator revenues from carrier billing, as well as looking at digital goods, digital content, ticketing, gambling, different areas of DCB which we feel are more likely to grow. Obviously, all our reports include strategic recommendation and player benchmarking for, in this instance, DCB vendors. But obviously, to provide real value for the research, we've gone ahead and looked to identify the emerging sectors, so to speak, the sectors that maybe are not very well established within DCB. Obviously, to give you an example, gambling is heavily regulated, but there are areas in which DCB vendors may be able to capitalize, what sort of countries they should be looking at, and whether we feel that laws both on gambling and DCB within certain regions are likely to change. So yeah, our report is around 100 pages, and it contains the areas such as player benchmarking, strategic recommendations, and identifying these emerging opportunities.
Paul, a summing up.
Well, I mean, I think we've had a great little snapshot there from Sam as to where DCB's at and where it's going. I think what's interesting, what I like about it is it does chime very much with the things that we're actually seeing, as well as, you know, because analysts are very good at sort of looking at what we might be expecting, but this actually does sort of seem to solidify what we're actually seeing in the market. And I don't know, with most digital things, COVID has accelerated the sort of implementation and developments. We're sort of many years ahead, perhaps, of where we would have been in just a few months. And I think that's equally true for carrier billing. And I think finally we're starting to see it appear in these more mainstream applications where it has a natural home. And it's always baffled me that it's never been taken up in those markets and those sort of verticals, because it's so easy to do. And on on a more personal note, during the lockdown, I've done a lot of online shopping like everybody, and just end up almost always back at Amazon because it's so easy to pay. And yesterday I tried to buy something not on Amazon. It took so long faffing about setting up an account and adding a card and all. Just think I can't be bothered. And I think anything that sort of brings in a quick, easy way of accessing services in the case of carrier billing, it is what not just young people but even old people like me want. So I think the research is very timely, and I think it paints a very accurate picture of where we're at and where we're going. It's well worth a read. If you've got if you can, I'd download get the full report, because it's really good.
There you go. There's a sales pitch right there for you, Sam. And then just I'll just sign off by saying that Telemedia events and Telemedia Publishing have got a great partnership going with Juniper Research, and so we're very grateful to get first-hand look at an early look at most of the relevant reports, of which there are many. So keep an eye out for them. And as I say, we do tend to put most of the white papers on the online, telemediaonline.co.uk. There's also going to be a couple of pre-recorded sessions with Juniper, which are going to appear in our Telemedia 8.1.com online initiative, which I can now talk about freely. Although you can't actually go into it yet because it hasn't launched, but it's basically the replacement for our live event, World Telemedia, which is now going to be postponed until May next year, unfortunately. But the good news is we will have a very, very, very extensive online pre-recorded conference, and Juniper, I'm very pleased to say, will be partnering with us on a number of those sessions, and the DCB, of course, will be one of the hot topics that will be highlighted, and there will be some more detailed slides which will refer to some of the findings in the current report. So I just want to say thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Sam, for joining us. You're our first guest on Telemedia News in 10, and I think from now on, Paul, everybody that comes on must have a beard.
I think so. Definitely, particularly the ladies.
Especially the ladies. So goodbye, chaps. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all again soon.
Excellent.
Cheers, thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Take care, everyone. Bye, Jarv.
Bye, mate.